Utah Valley. Bring everyone together.
Welcome back to the County Seat. Our topic this week is the environmental trends, the economic costs of wilderness. This is a study that came about as the work of associates and professors from 2 different universities. Very interesting report. And let me introduce them now. They're joining us for this discussion. Ryan Yonk, who is with Southern Utah University, and you teach in the political science department, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct, thanks.
We also have Brian Steed, who is from Utah State University, the Huntsman School of Business. And we also have with him Randy Simmons, the other author, who also teaches at the Huntsman School of Business. Now I want to start with you two first, okay? What comes up in my mind is this report is kind of pops the popular myth about tourism and wilderness being the default for making being the favorable land use planning mechanism to make counties prosper. And that comes out of a school that typically people tend to think of as more friendly towards environmental causes. You guys taking a lot of flack for that at all? Your colleagues kind of like chase you down on that, or what?
It's a fair question. Honestly, it's an interesting topic to us for that very reason, because so much has been said from the one side that this is good for local economies. Both Randy and I have a background working in county and community governments. And looking at this, it's an interesting disconnect to where you have many local government officials who find wilderness to be just the worst thing ever. And you've got many folks in the environmental community that say this is very, very good for communities. And we wanted to explore that disconnect to see what the data show.
Were you surprised at the outcome, any of you?
No, I don't think we were particularly surprised. Looking at sort of our basic notion, talking to folks that were actually on the ground, had watched wilderness happen in their areas, the anecdotal story was this story, the story that we find. And so it's for a long time run in the face of the more traditional academic studies which claim these great positive impacts from wilderness. And it never connected with those who are actually on the ground witnessing what happens in their community. So for us, I don't think it was surprising.
You know, what I found interesting in this report as I read through your summary, you did cite some other institutes and organizations that had made findings about how much property value is added and how much of a boost to the economy it makes. And did you do any research on how they made those assertions and what evidence they used to come up with it? Because it seemed very different than yours. I mean, I don't want to point any fingers or say any names, but the name Sonoran Institute just like seems to come up, you know.
In reality, kind of the impetus behind this study was the Sonoran piece. We were aware of it. We were interested in finding out, you know, how they had come to the findings that they did, and we started a pretty serious investigation there. We also sought some grant money from the federal government in looking to study this. It's a federal issue, and so we started to explore this in more detail, and Ryan did some of the background work in that.
Yeah, some of it, yeah. No, I mean, we have sort of, there are 2 things that are really different about our approach than most of the others. Mm-hmm. We take an overtime approach going back to 1995 so that we have 3 separate panels of data rather than a single snapshot in time. And then we also focus in on data that anybody can download. All the data used for the study is downloaded either from the Census Bureau or the Bureau of Labor Statistics that you can hop on the internet and download at any time.
I did follow that through, yeah. And thought, you know, this is remarkably, and forgive me for taking another shot at other people who've done the study, but it was like, it seemed fairly obvious these are good indicators. I mean, when you start looking at income and tax revenue and stuff like that, that's a pretty good indicator of what's going on in a county. And it was I mean, you know, I'm not a real great statistician. That's no secret to anybody, but it was a fairly simple process to follow. And I say, okay, this makes sense. Yeah.
Well, Ed, Ryan was the one who spent, I think, the most time in actually figuring out what data we could use. Mm-hmm. Because we were a little frustrated trying to figure out what was going on in the Sonoran report because they used data that's proprietary. Yeah. We asked them for it, it wasn't available. So how can you test something if you don't get the data? So that's what we wanted to do, was do a study that anybody could replicate and see it and agree or disagree with us. But so we used public data and, as you said, ones relating to the local economy.
And then it was a decision. There are other measures that you could use. tax receipts, payroll findings, all those things are valuable. Income is another indicator, but there are other things you could use. And so we made a choice that these were what we wanted to use because we thought they took on three separate sort of ways of measuring what's going on in a county, sort of at the aggregate level and then the more individualized.
That does point to, now there are two things that stuck out in my mind as I went through this.
Okay.
One is that most all of the assertions that I've heard anecdotally from the counties apply here. You know, average wage dropping in counties that are heavily reliant on tourism and service industries, and it's always been a story, but here's a little bit of a proof. The other one that really surprised me is, while the numbers are notable,
Yeah.
they're not hugely, it's not like, you know, a county is going to be destined for economic ruin with a wilderness dropping in their backyard, nor vice versa. The spreads weren't huge. I mean, they would to you as an individual with income. You see 92,000, you look at a county budget.
Well, but look at the size of the budgets in those small counties.
Well, that's true, Daggett.
I mean, when I was mayor, our city budget for operating budget was under $1 million. So you're talking at 10% of that.
That's true.
Yeah, I mean, although they're not terribly huge numbers for many of these counties, but they're real distinct and they're large enough that they do have an impact. And I guess that's sort of what we really find, is that it's a trade-off. I mean, we can't say and we don't say that wilderness is the ultimate decimator of local economies. It has an impact. Our findings indicate that it's primarily negative. But it doesn't, wilderness showing up isn't going to bankrupt a county. It's going to make it tougher based on our findings, but it's not the end.
Okay, and this might be becoming far too intellectual, but I'll just toss this one last question. And the laughter from that probably comes from the fact that I'm the one saying it's going to be far too intellectual.
You've got three professors here.
But
we can play this game.
The question I have is that, do you think the study indicates, like most, if you look at in communications, you know, you have the Festinger's cognitive, you know, I can't even think of the name of the study, but it's kind of a bell curve thing where there are returns that or opposition, it comes to a curve, and then the effects start to taper off. Or if you go to economics, you can do the Laffer curve.
Yeah,
sure.
And so is there a curve in this study, you think, where maybe a little wilderness is good and then it gets to a point where it's negative return, or what?
Go ahead, Brian.
Well, I think that it depends on context in reality. And I think that one of the things that inspired us to do this study is that many of the other studies that have previously been done have found a uniformly positive result, that this is always good for local equities. And we think that's probably just not very good science, if you find that same
I love
uniformity.
to hear guys say that.
And so
love to hear the questions. That's good. Yeah.
And in looking at this, I mean, I think there's some context that needs to be taken into consideration. Some wilderness may be good for economies, depending on the context of that wilderness. But we can't say that necessarily more is always better than less for those local economies, nor can we say that maybe dropping it into, say, Daggett County that was already referenced, that that's going to improve the economic conditions of Daggett County. We just can't make that claim.
Yeah, I think anything that takes away with how little there is for Daggett County to live off of probably doesn't help it.
Yeah, I mean, so sort of what we find is our sort of two takeaway messages as we read the piece, sort of coming back 6 months later after we originally wrote it, is the context Brian talks about, and then the concept of trade-offs. That you introduce a wilderness in an area, and there are going to be costs. There may be a net political positive, a net policy positive at the federal level, but those trade-offs, those costs, happen at the local level.
And I think that's a good point. And I think what I would like to do is explore what you think some of those trade-offs might be when we come back in just a minute. We'll be back in just a minute with more of the County Seat, a most interesting topic today on the economic value of additional wilderness. We'll be right back.
It's time you got off the beaten path. It's time you discovered something new. It's time you explored Kane County, Utah. Thousands of miles of trails, shorelines that go on forever, a horizon that compels you forward. Spend some time in Kane County and visit the past, present, and future. Kane County, Utah. It'll be time well spent.
the State of Utah School and Institutional Trust Lands Administration. SITLA manages 3.5 million acres in Utah lands with the express purpose of furthering the education of Utah students while promoting local industry, oil and gas, even residential development, all at the same time. Through the careful use of trust lands, we distributed more than $22 million to Utah schools last year. The State of Utah School and Institutional Trust Lands Administration, building the state's permanent school fund.
What is play? Is it culture? Is it adventure? Is it...
Ooh, it's a destination.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
That's correct.
Cedar City and Bryan Head in the heart of Utah's most epic landscapes. Beauty, culture, adventure. It's time you came out to play. Cedar City, Utah, where play is the thing. You haven't forgotten how to play. It's just that you haven't been to the right place yet.
Take a look. Take a glimpse. Take a peek. You'll be surprised by what you find. Check us out at DeseretPComplex.com. Our phone number is 435-843-4020. Adventure, beauty, excitement. Tooele County Parks and Recreation, bringing communities together.